car was state-of-the-art 25 years ago in the former communist so-called German Democratic Republic. And 26 years ago, if you wanted to own one of these cars, you had to wait up to 12 years till you finally got this car. For me personally, this was first time I ever had the chance to drive one of these Trabis, the GDR car, by myself. So actually it needed the NOAA conference, the conference about innovation and new technologies, to give me this chance. Thanks to you, NOAA. One thing is for sure, this car has got neither any self-driving technology, nor it is an Uber limousine. And this is exactly what tonight we want to talk about, the future of mobility. And who could do this better than these two guys? The CEO of Daimler, Dieter Zetsche, and the CEO of Uber, Travis Kalanick. Welcome. As a child, he went in Los Angeles from door to door and sold sets of knives. With his company Uber, he has sold 1 million car rides so far. And he created the most valuable startup in the whole world. With his company, he not only created a new service, but he created a new lifestyle. Sharing is the new black. The young consumers, they want to use, but they don't want to own anymore. But what the consumer wants is not necessarily what the EU wants. So, is Europe's and Euro's regulation the biggest enemy of innovation? Give a warm welcome to Travis Kalanick. The stage is yours.
I've got to get a couple of those cars on the system. That'd be fun. Look, it's really good to be here in Berlin. I've been to Berlin many times. It's the first time it's been warm. I live in Los Angeles, so it feels like home. I just want to stay here now. So look, it's really amazing to be here, really amazing to be on stage with of course, Kai and Dieter. A lot of basically entrepreneurs and CEOs, and you know, we're going to talk about the future of mobility. It's going to be exciting. I'm certainly excited. But in my presentation, I'm going to start with what I call the future of human-driven transportation. How we can reduce pollution, reduce congestion, make our cities more livable, and we do it with people. And with the technology in our pockets, yeah, I'm talking about a smartphone, not a self-driving car. And so I'll start with, well, the beginnings of Uber. This is a romantic shot of my co-founder and myself in front of the Eiffel Tower. It's when we came up with the idea for Uber. We could not. People who've been to Paris before Uber know that if you were in Paris in the evening, before Uber, you weren't getting home by car. You were getting home by walking. And my co-founder said, I just want to push a button and get a ride. And so we created that. It was just really humble beginnings, and we brought that back to San Francisco. But what we didn't realize is, when we first got started, was how big this could be. We just didn't know. But as we started doing literally tens of millions of rides, hundreds of millions of rides a month, what we started to see is the impact. And that impact started to affect cities in a very positive way. And the reason why is because, well, we got 1 billion cars on the planet right now. And that's actually created quite a big problem that we've just sort of gotten used to. And so those billion cars, of course, they are not all in the US. Germans are, of course, big lovers of cars too. But they are everywhere. And what we know, of course, is that across Europe, US, etc., people love their cars. It's about mobility. It's about getting where they want to go. And this is the number of passenger vehicles per 1,000 people. But what we also know is that all this private car ownership has a very public cost. People sit in traffic for hours a day. Today in the EU, well, in Germany specifically, 4 of the 10 most congested cities are here in Germany. There's people just sitting behind the wheel, grabbing onto that steering wheel, frustrated, maybe a little bit tense about getting to work. And spending that time, instead of being relaxed, well, being anxious. The congestion cost of just literally when you're stopped and not moving, just being stopped and not moving in traffic, is 1% of the GDP of the EU, 100 billion euro per year. And those cars that are sitting in traffic are, of course, responsible for 12% of the CO2 emissions that Europe generates, and obviously polluting the air and making our Earth a little bit less green. But that problem of traffic is actually only 4% of the problem, because 96% of the time your car is sitting idle, because you're only driving somewhere 4% of the day. And that means we have to store these billion cars somewhere. And in cities around the world, 15, 20, sometimes even 30% of our land is used to store these cars. We even have skyscrapers for cars. And so mayors across the EU and really around the world have had to deal with this problem of taking up all the land and the problem of congestion and the quality of life ramifications that it has. And they've had pretty good solutions, well, decent solutions. It's called mass transit. Mass transit moves lots of people very efficiently, but for some reason it just doesn't actually solve the entire problem. Why not? Well, because mass transit just can't go to everybody's doorstep. Right? To make it go to everybody's doorstep might cost hundreds of billions of euro just for a single city. And so we still have our cars. There's still hundreds of thousands or millions of cars that come into a city every day, even when there's great mass transit, like a city like Berlin. 37% of all people that are coming into the city are coming in their own car every day. And so that's when Uber comes in, is that, well, what if I could push a button and get a ride wherever I go? What kind of ways in which, how can we work with mass transit? So in the center of London, for instance, we know mass transit works pretty well. But what about the outside of London, right? As you get further and further out from the center of the city, you also get a situation where it's harder and harder for mass transit to go to everybody, and more expensive infrastructure investments to make that work. And so what we see in London, in the outer boroughs, is that 30% of the rides begin or end 200 meters or less to a transit stop. And so we complement mass transit systems, and quite often when I'm getting around cities, and I travel quite a bit, I'm taking the subway or I'm taking a bus somewhere and then hopping off and then taking an Uber for the last mile. In Paris, 10% of all of our trips begin or end in underprivileged zones. Zones that are underserved by mass transit and often lower income. There's a high correlation between lower income neighborhoods and a lack of mass transit. And that's a problem, because if you need a job, you need to work. Not having access to your city makes things pretty difficult. Or having access to your city, but there's so many connections and, well, it takes 2 or 3 hours to get to where you're going, can be also pretty problematic. And of course, right here is the graphs of Uber usage in cities across the EU. And what we see is the biggest, the highest volume times on our system are around midnight, sometimes a little bit later. Depends on the city. As you see, Paris goes a little bit later than everybody else. What that means, well, why is that? Well, guess what? Mass transit doesn't really work very well late at night. In many cities, it just turns off. And so that's when we see our system really go into high gear, is when mass transit isn't an option. And in this way, we're very complementary for those types of systems. But we still have our cars, and we still need to get around them. And so in many ways, as we started to get bigger in various cities, we started asking the question, can we actually use cars? In an unlimited way, can we use cars to actually reduce congestion? And so we started looking at all the cars that were out there, and you see all these cars, and there's one person in the car and 4 empty seats. What if all these cars became shared cars? Could we divide by 2 the number of cars that were on the road? And so we tried. In San Francisco, our first city, our home city, where of course it's one of our biggest cities because it's been around the longest. We're 6 years old now. We said, look, there are so many people that are pushing a button and getting a ride, and they're doing the same ride at the same time. And we were, it was a couple years ago, we would send 2 cars to pick up 2 people that were getting picked up in the same place and going to the same destination. We said, could we make those 2 requests such that they basically became one? Could it be that I push a button, the car comes, and I open the door just like before, and there's somebody else already in the car, going to the same place I am? Would people be willing to share a car? And like my product managers we would debate this before we launched, and nobody really knew, but I said, guys, there's this thing called a bus. People are used to sharing vehicles, it's a thing. And they're like, yeah, when you're in the back of the car, does it get awkward? Well, maybe. But we tried. And what we found was that in San Francisco, well, today now, we're doing 40% of all of our trips in San Francisco are Uber pool trips. 40%. And San Francisco is almost $1 billion a year city for us. And so on the left is all the separate trips. What our traffic looked like in San Francisco, the Uber traffic. The colored lights are where the traffic was most intense. And then when we introduced Uber Pool and scaled it, what the traffic looks like after. And so what you end up having is more people getting served by fewer cars. And what you end up having is less congestion, less cars on the road, less pollution, and a better city because of it. And so we started rolling out in a bunch of different cities. Like I said, I'm from Los Angeles, it's my hometown. Everybody drives there, but it took off there too. In the first 8 months, we did almost 8 million fewer miles on the roads. 1.4 thousand metric tons of CO2 saved in the first 8 months. Now we're much bigger now, and probably doing this, maybe even multiples of this at this point. And in China, we're doing 30 million Uber Pool trips per month. That's 1 million, shouldn't say 500,000. That's 1 million Uber Pool trips per day. It kills me to think that people are taking a picture of this slide because the math doesn't work. Stop, put your phones down. Okay. And so we've rolled it out around the world, and really in our biggest cities that we serve. And we now have 18 cities, each of them with over 100,000 people carpooling, Uber pooling every week. Now remember, carpooling, this is not like a new idea. It's not like something that Uber invented. That's for sure. We did not. It's been around. Well, I was in Moscow before Berlin, and they may have invented this. Okay, but it's never really taken off. And so when you can go to a mayor and say, I, in a matter of months, can get 100,000 people carpooling that weren't carpooling before, that makes a difference. It's a big deal. And today, now 20% of all of our trips globally are Uber pool trips, shared rides. And so this is not a picture of a suburb in anywhere in Europe. This is actually a picture of my house, my hometown. And it's traditional sort of suburban America. And what would happen in the mornings when I was a kid is all these cars would back out of the driveways at the same time. They'd all turn this way, and they'd all go in a line. Many of them, guess what, going to the same place, right? And so the question is like, wow, what could be, a lot of people get how Uber Pool works, and a lot of people are using it, and it's commercial drivers, and that's great, but what if we could turn all these people backing out of their driveways and turn them into Uber drivers just going to work? What would happen if we could make that happen, right? Like a city like New York, for instance, there's 2 million cars going over those bridges into Manhattan every day, even though it has a wonderful mass transit system. If you could do something like this, you could really change the city. You could really change the traffic picture and the pollution picture. And so the idea is, well, what if I could just have my coffee, go in my car, turn on my app, and on my way to work, pick a neighbor up who's going basically to the same destination. We'd love to do it. And like I said, carpooling is not a new thing. It really started getting popular in media when the oil crisis of the 70s happened. Because, man, we need to share this car because that gas is super expensive. The thing is it never really took off because, well, first, there was no technology that could coordinate this kind of interest in people going to the same place at the same time. Who were these people and how do we match them efficiently? And that's why it was just never convenient enough. But there was also the incentive piece. So today we have that technology, but we don't have the incentives. What happens is, well, if you make a profit taking somebody somewhere, you are now a commercial driver, and you must have a commercial license, and this is pretty much the way it works in all cities around the world. In the US, there's a mark of what commercial means. It's 54 cents per mile. Here, it might be like 30 cents per kilometer, something around there. And if you make less than 30 cents per kilometer, then you're non-commercial and you can pick somebody up on your way to work, no problem. If you made 31 cents, and I'm approximating here, it depends where, what city, then you are a commercial driver, you must have a license, and if you don't, you are committing a crime. And so this is the kind of, we need to fix that incentive because, well, if you're just going 10 kilometers down the road, there's not enough incentive to go pick somebody up and then drop them off and then go on your way to work. And if there was just a little more of a profit incentive, then what happens is people just naturally go and pick somebody up. And it can be a bit of a community service where the incentives are aligned. And it's not a subsidy that's necessary from cities, it just happens. And so it's exciting to think about these prospects. This Uber Commute is our next big thing. And really what it's about is turning our cities into greener cities. It's about giving 20% of the land back to the city. It's about cleaning the air. It's about actually also creating tens of thousands of jobs in every city we're in. And the idea is basically through shared rides, we can make cities better and we can reclaim our cities. So very glad to be here. Super excited about the prospect of bringing Uber Commute, Uber Pool to more cities in Europe. And I guess I'll be up here with Dieter and Kai later.
Thank you, Travis. Ladies and gentlemen, some people call him Mr. Daimler. Others call him the fabulous Dr. Z. In any case, one thing is for sure, without any doubts, Dieter Zetsche is one of the most successful CEOs in Germany. He says, nowadays I'm having more fun in my job than the last 40 years before. And the reason for this good mood, I think, has to do with his excellent figures. Last year, Daimler made revenues about 150 billion and the profit was around 9 billion euros. But what does it mean for him? What does it mean for his company if more and more people decide, yes, they would like to drive in a car, but they don't want to own it? All of a sudden, it's not enough anymore just to build the best cars in the world. The competitors are not BMW or Audi anymore. The competitors are Google, Apple, and probably Uber. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Dieter Zetsche.
Thanks, Kai, and good afternoon or good evening to all of you. I'm very glad to be with you here at this conference and to speak with you, to you about a revolution in the automotive industry. Some 200 years ago, the most favorite tools of people going for revolution was the guillotine. These days it's somewhat different. It's more likely the internet. And there are many industries which, if they don't adapt fast to the new environment of the internet, are highly threatened, mostly existentially. Take as one example the hair wax industry. Obviously, it doesn't need any explanation. You see, when Kai went to the Silicon Valley, everything changed ever since. I must admit, though, that I, years before that, already chopped hair wax, but for different reasons. So, as I acknowledge that this conference is not a hairstyling conference, I want to focus on autos. You're not surprised, I guess. And I'm very confident to prove with the next photo that Daimler will lead the digital revolution. I guess that Travis was convinced anyway that big corp IT departments would look like that. The point is that this picture has been taken 30 years ago. And it not only proves that we tried to set a trend for moustaches even at that time, but it proves as well that more than 30 years ago, we were running our first autonomous cars. It was a van on the Autobahn, and with the tools we had at that time, we were driving the digital background to have this van successfully and driverless make its way on the Autobahn. So that's how far we're going back in that technology. And once again, that's why we do believe that we are well prepared for the tremendous change which lies ahead of us. And I now want to talk about 3 different cars to make that point. I would like to start with the new E-Class. This is obviously a series production car, and it's available in the showrooms, and it's today almost autonomously driving car. It's the first public, or the first car which got a license in Nevada for full autonomous testing. And the point is that this car, production car, has no changes on the hardware to do so, and very minor modifications on the software to be fully automated in testing in Nevada. So this car is able to do a lot, much more than it's allowed to do at that point of time on German roads and many other, almost all other roads as well. It's obviously able to operate semi-autonomously on basically all roads. It can change lanes to pass vehicles autonomously. In critical situations, it can detect these critical situations and it brakes and steers autonomously around the obstacles. It is the first car with car-to-X communication, so it can warn other vehicles from any hazardous situations which are around the corner. And you can park it outside of the car with your app, just driving it in the next available parking space or getting out of it. So, how did we get there? Actually, step by step, by always improving our assistance systems, which in the first place are meant to increase the safety of our customers, to prevent accidents from happening. And we did that step by step, and the benefit is that people got used to it. And that's extremely important because many technologies are prevented from execution by lack of trust of people, of customers, of potential customers. One good example is when we go back to the year 1865, when in the UK the Red Flag Act was enacted. This was a new regulation which required road locomotives, as they were called, to adhere to a speed limit which was defined by a man who had to walk ahead of this road locomotive to define the speed as a maximum of walking speed. I think it's pretty important to mention that thereby the Brits invented a regulation for cars before the car was invented. And they did that, that's in light of Brexit, pretty interesting, before Brussels even existed in its current form. So